the pillar of the Constitution. This stalactite, one of the largest in the world in 1953, is 35 feet high and 75 feet in circumference. That's as large as some of them earthworks, ain't it? But yeah, I was going to do a little history of the Native Americans in this cave here, Wyandotte Cave. Alright, we're going to do the history of Wyandotte Cave, Crawford County, Indiana. Hope you guys can hear me alright. There is no actual record of the first white man to enter the Wyandotte Cave. The earliest date mentioned is 1798 by historians. The Indians probably had spoke of it earlier, for it was known to them many hundreds of years before civilized man even reached America. The Wyandottes, a powerful branch of the Iroquois tribe from whom the cave takes its name, did not actually live in the region near the cave. Instead, when white men began to make conquest for land in the area, they found wandering bands of Shawnee and Cherokee Indians from Kentucky, using it as a hunting ground, and Lenape or Delawares from north central part of the state, making occasional forays through the region. It may have been these tribes who left the broken flint chips, the huge piles of imperfect arrowheads, the burnt torches, and the charred remains of sagegrass and hickory bark in the cave. Other implements peculiar to them in the hills and fields adjacent to the entrance. The floor of one chamber of the cave is covered to a depth of 5 or 6 feet deep with flakes, spalls, and broken nodules. Certain proof that here, more than a mile from daylight in the dark, was once an important flint mining center. Prehistorians have now given this particular variety of flint that is blue-gray Wyandotte flint. Whether or not a race of people antedating the modern Indians are suggested by some authorities also traveled through the cave for flint and other stones is open for conjecture. Certainly, there is ample evidence that the cave was visited and traveled long before white man ever came to America. Possibly the first definite record of Wyandotte and the white man is 1806. In that summer, William Henry Harrison, the governor of Indiana Territory, and later the 9th President of the United States, visited the cave and supposedly wrote the first account of it. The cave was a scene of great activity during the War of 1812, when saltpeter, one of the essential ingredients of gunpowder, was made from the nitrous dirt in some of the passageways. Saltpeter was a much-needed mineral, and the finding of a home source of supply greatly contributed to our winning the war and aided the early settlers. Gunpowder was needed for the weapons that both protected the pioneers from Indian attack and enabled them to procure the meat for their subsistence. The first explorers of Kentucky and neighboring states had discovered that potassium nitrate, also known as saltpeter, could be made from the nitrous dirt in many of the caves of the country and had made good use of this circumstance. And I believe potassium nitrate is bat guano. When England's embargo threatened to cut us off from foreign sources of supply of eastern gunpowder mills, called upon the caves and the rock shelters of the Midwest for nitrous dirt, and many thousands of pounds were shipped over the difficult mountain passes to the eastern seaboard. At the time of the War of 1812 started, Dr. Samuel Adams, didn't he make beer or ale, had realized the possibility of Wyandotte and secured the land from the government and went to work making saltpeter on a very large scale. The only portion of the cave then known was what is now called the Old Cave Route, and to it Dr. Adams gave the name Indiana Saltpeter Cave. Later he referred to it as the Epson Salt Cave. Dr. Adams wrote at great length about the mineral deposits of the cave in a letter published in Volume 1, Transactions and Collections of the American Antiquarian Society, in the form of an appendix entitled Account of a Great and Very Extraordinary Cave in Indiana. In the letter from the owner of a gentleman in Frankfort, Kentucky. The letter was written February 27th, 1818, but was not printed until 1820. How did he write it if he didn't print it? In it, Dr. Adams mentions the great amount of sulfate of magnesia or Epsom salt, which abounds throughout the cave in almost its whole extent. The next production of importance is the nitrate of lime, or the saltpeter earth. There are vast quantities of this earth, and equal in strength to any that I have ever seen. Dr. Adams continued the business of making saltpeter from 1812 to 1819, using the dirt from Wyandotte and from another cave also on the same property, now known as Saltpeter Cave. After the cessation of hostiles, the business became unprofitable, and Dr. Adams gave up his claim on the property, presumably for something more lucrative. In 1819, Dr. H. McMurtry's Sketches of Louisville and its Environs appeared, probably the first published account of the cave in the United States, calling Wyandotte the Mammoth Cave. McMurtry gives an interesting description of the part of the cave then known. At what precise period it was first discovered must be left to tradition and wild conjecture to determine, but it is evident from circumstances hereafter to be mentioned that many ages must have elapsed since that terrible convulsion of the earth, which has in some places rent asunder the solid rock for 100 feet together. Although its existence was greatly asserted in 1798, it is only since the year of 1814, took a little trip, long that we have any account of it that can be relied upon. Despite the reference in 1814, McMurtry continues on the next page by telling General William Henry Harrison visit in 1806, and says this gentleman informed Dr. Adams that there were at that time enormous lumps of some saline matter scattered over the floor, individual pieces of which he was persuaded would have weighed from 1 to 200-pound chunks. It is not known now just what General Harrison referred to, but it is likely he mistook some chunks of limestone for a saline matter. There is no record of large, detached blocks of any mineral ever being found in the cave. McMurray continues by describing the entrance in the first passage and goes on and on and on. In this passage, the Epson salt cave or the Epsom salt or the sulfate of magnesia first makes its appearance. It is seen upon the rocks in every direction, shooting into small crystals whose luster is dimmed by the quantity of dust showered on them from above. This salt appears to be inexhaustible, not only from the quantity seen encrusting the surface and filling up the spaces between different strata of rock throughout the vast extent of this passage, but from its rapid and continual reproduction, as a proof of which the owner once had a small projection that was covered, swept perfectly clean, when in a few months it was found thickly sodded as before. Although crystals of Epsom salt are still found throughout the dry parts of the cave, today there are nowhere near the quantities suggested by McMurtry in the account above. Possibly the continued passage of thousands of people through the cave avenues has had adverse effects on the formation of these salts. And this is written in 1953. At another point, McMurtry mentions two Indian drawings, one resembling a savage armed with a bow and arrows, but there is no trace of these drawings today. Could have been covered with salt, I reckon, and then mined off. Shortly after Dr. Adams left the cave in 1819, Mr. Rothrock, Henry P. Rothrock, who had immigrated from Pennsylvania, whose descendants still own the property, now the government owns it, purchased some 4,000 acres of the heavily timbered land from the government at the prevailing price of $1.25 per acre. It was simply a coincidence that the cavern's entrance happened to be on the land. Mr. Rothrock attached little importance to it, but went ahead with his plans and built a dam and a sawmill on the banks of the Great Blue River, about 1/2 mile from the entrance. The remains of the old dam and part of the mill foundation are still standing and may yet be seen by anyone interested. I've showed that before. I need to go redo that. The cave was considered of little importance in 1843. The state legislature was persuaded to pass an act concerning saltpeter caves for other purposes. The preamble to this act stated that it has been represented to this General Assembly that great loss has been sustained by the owners of stock of cattle and horses from the use of substance abuse extracted from saltpeter caves, because cows and stuff just keep licking it. Epsom salt cave and others of different kind, in consequence of the same having been left unenclosed by the owners, so it needed to be fenced off, and provided the owners of any such cave that was not fenced off liable for damages and a fine of $10 a day for every day it was not fenced in. The cattle of those days must have been quite nimble, for none of the Indiana caves were then easy of entrance, nor well lighted for a wandering stock. The Roughrocks continued to farm. They didn't to farm and run the sawmill, and then occasionally visitors in the cave until 1850. Sometime during that year, a party of explorers were resting about 1/4 mile back in the cave when they noticed strong currents of air coming from under a large flat rock. Moving it, they found an opening which subsequently led them to that great portion of Wyandotte known as the New Cave, which comprises the long and short routes and mile upon mile upon mile of subterranean splendor. I think 22 miles or 27. Word of the seemingly endless passages, vast size, and great beauty of the newly discovered channels in the cavern were soon spread afar. The Rothrock's found it necessary to build an inn to take care of the visitors who flocked, and they offered a guiding service. Today, the old log cabin inn is gone. Yeah, they're talking about a modern structure. I think it's gone now. And the cave properties are still owned by the descendants. Chief among family members engaged in many other businesses, but whose interest in the cave has never flagged, is Frank Rothrock's of Spokane. It was he who added the Little Wyandotte Cave to the property in 1947 and had a modern electrical lighting system installed, which makes the Little Cave one of the best lighted caves in America in 1953. As he is familiarly known, it is a FM, I guess that's Frank M, I guess is who we're talking about, whose memory spans the time when, as a small boy at Wyandotte, the country was so unsettled that he had a tamed wolf as a pet, and such things as present-day motorized digging equipment were undreamed of and not even a thought in anyone's mind, to the present when he engages bulldozers and similar equipment to move whole hillsides in search of new and unexplored caves. Despite the proximity of Little Wyandotte and Wyandotte Cave, there is no known connection between the two. Each has features and scenes quite different from the other. Trips into either start from the Wyandotte Hotel, which is not there anymore, are conducted by the same guide. A visit to Little Wyandotte requires 45 minutes. Trips into the larger cave require from 1.5 to 9 hours, depending on the route that you take. And it goes on here, talking about it here. I'm going to zoom in here or skip forward here to the prehistories. Here's an interesting line I was going to read to you. After passing a bunch of the nest egg, the hippopotamus, the Neptune's retreat, and other fanciful named objects, you enter the room of Tecumseh's bower, an alcove filled with formations, and one of these bears a striking resemblance to a human figure. Early explorers thought it looked like the great Indian chief Tecumseh himself, so it was named. The room of Rothrock's Cathedral is one of the largest cave rooms known. In Rothrock's Cathedral stands Monument Mountain, the largest underground mountain in the world, in 1953. It is 175 feet tall and 1,200 feet in circumference. On top of this mountain, a towering mass of jumbled rocks, are 3 spire-like stalagmites. Above them is Wallace's Grand Dome, named for General Lew Wallace, famous Hoosier author of Ben-Hur. The dome is a smooth slab of limestone, some 60 feet long and 30 feet wide, fringed with innumerable stalactites of all shades of white, red, brown, and cream. When visitors are seated at the foot of this underground mountain, dim lights are placed on the opposite side, forming a subdued silhouette of a rugged rock mass and its upstanding stalagmites. Called the Cathedral by Moonlight, this impressive sight was described by one visitor as indescribable vision, as if an opening had been made into the realms of supernatural splendor. Thought that was funny language there. There's a picture of Monument Mountain. Monument Mountain in the Wyandotte Cave, towering 175 feet high. This is said to be the largest underground mountain in the world because of the tilted camera angle necessary. The flat slab of limestone above the top of the mountain looks like a far wall. However, it is directly above the stalactites. And it's getting to be a long video. I must be a slow reader. Alright, we got a prehistoric explorers of Wyandotte Cave. Primitive man undoubtedly regarded the dark, unfathomable recesses of caves with awe and terror. The unknown has ever been looked upon as being the abode of devils, unbelievable monsters, ghosts, and supernatural beings. Whether it was flaming white hot tail of a comet flashing across the heavens, or the black terror-filled depths of a cave in the hills, our early ancestors feared it because it was beyond their comprehension. It has ever been so from the first faint dawn of mankind's awakening to the so-called civilized present. That which we cannot understand is looked upon with dread. The cold winter nights drove them in there for protection. I'm going to skip through here a little bit. Then too, when men lived for any length of time in any certain cave, there were scraps of refuse, broken weapons, implements, pottery, and the like, discarded either in the cave or nearby the cave. These masses of accumulated material, Kajokan moddings, or kitchen leavings, have thrown much light on the customs and habits of our early man. Thus, it may be seen that caves are very important in the search for more data on the race of man's early history. Early exploration for human remains in caves started in Europe has been intense for over 100 years. Some of the most ancient known evidence having been discovered there. But in America, the search for prehistoric relics in caves is almost obsolete and unknown, especially in Indiana. And the surface has only been scratched. This is especially true of Wyandotte Cave because it's in Indiana, where there has been only casual archaeological work ever since the beginning of the saltpeter mining area in the early 1800s. However, even the small bits unearthed have revealed many, many things. In the dry portion of Wyandotte, there's ample evidence that some race of somebody before the time of the whites frequently visited or lived or traveled through the cavern. Bits of burned hickory bark, pieces of reed, poles, grass, even fragments of woven material are found throughout these parts, and sometimes under rock beneath deposits that have taken hundreds of years to pile up and accumulate on top of this fragments of material. Ever since these evidences of aboriginal exploration were first noticed, interesting speleologists have been asking themselves, for what else besides flint and shelter did the early caveman want from a cave? With crude torches and lights they used, they could not have been exploring simply for the sake of spelunking. Were they looking for something, or actually finding and carrying away what they were looking for? With incomplete evidence now available, no one knows, or probably will ever know, because we're in Indiana. No one cares, evidently. I mean, they care. They want to know so they can lock it away in their vault. When white man first ventured into what is now the old cave, they found not only the possible prehistoric remains mentioned above, but also at the end of the passage, in the base of the Pillar of the Constitution, a huge excavation. For some time, it was thought that this had been done by the saltpeter miners in 1812. However, 1877, Professor Collett found several glacial boulders not native to this section near the pillar, which, from indications such as the wear and the bruises, had been used as hammers or grinding pedestals, and proved conclusively that this part of the cave had been visited, if not occupied, by men of the Stone Age. Soon afterwards, 1878, Dr. Hovey also claimed that the excavation in the pillar had been made by Indians, and from then until the present evidence has occasionally been brought forward that some race of men before the advent of the whites had chiseled away a great part of the base of this huge stalagmite. In all, more than 1,000 cubic feet of the formation had been removed, mined. Although the whole is insignificant when compared to the whole column, much of the broken calcium carbonate from this hole is still in the cavern, scattered from about the room in which the formation stands. The first systematic search was done by Blanchley in 1896, when he did considerable archaeological room where the pillar stands. His measurements indicated a space 8 feet long, 6 feet high, and 5 feet wide had been quarried from the column. A perpendicular section through it revealed the following. Bat guano was a half-inch thick. Ashes in a compressed damp bed with occasional flakes of stalagmites intermingled was 14 inches. Charcoal, 1 inch. Ashes with flakes of rock, 3 inches. Rectangular flakes of stalagmite, varying in size from 1 by 2 square inches to pieces 8 by 3 by 1 inch, or even larger, with occasional charcoal, was 28 inches thick or deep. Charcoal was a half-inch thick. Flakes of stalagmite were 4 inches. That's a total of 51 inches of debris. In this trench were also found 6 quartose boulders weighing from 3 to 6 pounds, and 5 different deer's horns, antlers, which had evidently been used as wedges. Since then, several other hammerstones have been unearthed in the same room, some of which have depressions worn in them by the fingers of the original old quarrymen. For many years, a number of these stones were on display at the hotel. For what purpose this material was used by the old miners, no one has ever been certain. Very few Indian implements of stalagmitic rock have ever been found in the United States of America, which may be partly explained in the fact that this rock soon decomposes when left to the elements. Yet this material must have been of great value for them to dig it, for it was secured only after tremendous amounts of work, and it seems reasonable to suppose that some of it would be found outside the cave, despite its softness. What then became of it? This is perhaps the most puzzling question in connection with the first explorers' Wyandotte Cave. It may be argued that the Indians visited this part of the cave for flint as they did in the other part. But this part of the cave lies a hundred or more feet above the flint strata layer, and no flint is exposed anywhere in the passage. This seems to indicate strongly that the pieces of stalagmite formation alone took them over the rough, hilly, and pit-filled reaches of this branch of the cave. They got two grapevines tied in a knot here, found in the cave. So they had some kind of lashing there. 1850, when the whites dug away in what is now called the short route, they found more evidence of earlier explorers. The walls and ceilings of some of the rooms and passageways were blackened with smoke from fires and torches, and great quantities of hickory bark, poles of sassafras, pawpaw, and other soft woods easily cut with a stone axe were found. The small blackened walls may be seen today, as may be some of the poles, and close examination will soon convince the most skeptical that they were cut by a dull stone tool. Some of the poles lie immovable under masses of rock that have been dropped from the ceiling. In one place in particular, the author has examined carefully a stick that rests beneath a huge stone, and is convinced that it was there long before the rock dropped from above. If this great rock fell at the same time as the others not far away, and one takes the word of scientists as to the age of formations of similar rocks, the stick would have an incredibly staggering age. Since this part of the cave has been traveled for long over 100 years, and no knowledge of any rocks ever falling in that length of time, there is indeed cause for much speculation. It is a known fact that the stick has been there for over 150 years, but for how many years before the past 150 is unknown. The new part of Wyandotte Cave seems to have been visited for quarrying of flint, most of which have been done by the more or less modern Indians. Flint ledges several inches wide are exposed in numerous places. In one spot, a ledge has been dug out for many yards in depth across the cavern. The floor near these places is literally covered with broken pieces of the highly prized material. Implements or weapons were not made in the cave. The Indians evidently preferred to remove the flint to the better light of day to process it. Yet this removal was not necessarily because of the darkness of the cave, for even when flint was taken from outside, quarry implements were not made at the site but removed to village workshops. Archaeologists have located many large flint workshops in the Harrison and Crawford counties, but they're undocumented, or they're documented in their hidden files, because I ain't never heard of them. And undoubtedly, some of the flint from Wyandotte was there worked into necessary tools and weapons in these flint shops. Most of the broken pieces of flint now in the cave are rectangular in shape and average roughly about 4 inches by 2½ inches in size. Few of these show marks of tools of any sort, but there is no doubt that they were broke from the head-high ledge by an artificial means. Near each quarry there are smoke-blackened walls, innumerable pieces of wood and sticks, most of which show traces of having seen fire. Throughout the flint beds, one may also find pieces of grapevine, sedge grass, reeds, and the like. Careful search has shown that the bundles of reeds or bark used for torches were tied together with grapevine ropes. Most of the bundles seem to have been about 4 inches in diameter, as indicated by the loops of the vine. No complete loops larger than this have ever been found, but sections of what were longer rope have been dug up here and there. The larger bundles were probably a reserve supply for fuel and torches. The almost unbelievable amount of hickory bark, easily stripped from the shelled bark hickory tree, shows that this must have been a prized fuel and an awesome torch maker. Intentionally shaped tools have never been found in Wyandotte, although several arrowheads and other flint tools have been unearthed in small caves, usually just inside the entrance. However, these are of rather late Indian workmanship and may not have come from the same tribes as which did the mining. Considering the number of years that the cave was worked, it seems inconceivable that broken tools, at least, would not have been dropped or discarded here or there. Perhaps there are as many such implements among the piles of broken rocks on the floor, and later archaeological investigations may bring some light to that, to them, but not to us, because they won't ever tell us. Some quarrying of stalagmitic material was also done in the new cave, but in much smaller quantities. On the crest of the Monument Mountain, off to one side of the regular path, there are a number of broken pieces of spar, and on a large stalagmite, 4 feet high and 10 feet in circumference, the marks of crude hammers and chisels show plainly. This formation, which lies just below the summit, was obviously chopped down by blunt instruments. But this part of the cave seems to have been used chiefly for the quarrying of flint, which is broken from the walls anywhere it could be reached. In the dining room, a dry and dusty chamber some 30 feet from the largest flint quarry, an excavation by the author and Mr. Rothrock revealed a great quantity of bird bones, small bird bones. And near this spot, we also found pieces of crude rope, woven fabric, in an immense grass bed, and the mummified foot of a deer. In the late 1850s, a continuation of what is now the Long Route enlarged the small holes through solid flowstone. It has been estimated that the time required for this sheet of calcium carbonate deposit to form was around 2,000 or 3,000 years. So the entrances shrunk, and they were trying to figure out how fast the rock grew to shut the close off the entrance. Yet, at first, there was no opening through which a man could make his way. When they finally completed the breaking and clambering eagerly over the slippery rock, the explorers found moccasin tracks scattered all over the floor on the other side. The tracks were particularly plain in the Morton's Marble Hall and the Crawfish Spring Branch. They wandered from side to side of these avenues, but were said to point in one direction only, inward. They never came out. They were followed for some distance in both passages, but were finally lost to sight among the rocks on the floor. So they never seen the tracks come back out, but they lost the tracks in the rocks. It was at first supposed that the tracks had actually been made before the closing of the flowstone by natural process, but several thousand years is a long, long time. Although this theory may be as correct as any other, a later theory suggests that the explorers entered the cave through another entrance that is unknown. They walked through walls. Since then, if this be true, the entrance has been purposely or accidentally well concealed, for not the slightest trace has ever been found. Whenever your story sounds too good, they're going to make one up. An interesting point about the Indian tracks is that the clay on the floor is now and was in 1850 of a hardness that can be marred only by a sharp heel kick. Mud of that consistency would certainly not show a moccasin track. These Indian footprints must have been made then, before the mud had dried to its present state, making the tracks very old. These are the known facts about the possible prehistoric explorers of Wyandotte Cave. All else is speculation. The story is very much incomplete, and archaeologists are doing all they can to hide the information. Perhaps in the not so distant future, they may come out and tell us, they may not. And a few hundred feet from Wyandotte Cave is the entrance to Little Wyandotte Cave, called by many writers one of the finest gems of the cave world to be found in all of North America. A winding path shaded by great oaks and beeches leads from the lobby to this delightful subterranean wonder, although small when compared to the big with which it may be visited in a labyrinth directed through the lights. And alright, I'm gonna pause for a minute. Now we're 40 minutes. Sorry, it's all crooked, but this is in Wyandotte Valley. This is the resident of Mr. Rothrock, and this house is that building's still there. I think it was a hotel or school or something like that afterwards. Here's an interesting read. Immediately over the falling rock is an object which the guide pointed out as Indian Chief, and upon careful looking we found it to be rather a correct representation, as correct perhaps as is the Old Man of the Mountain on Mount Washington. It has an advantage over that wonder, however, for by viewing it from different locales, we can make two distinctive pictures of it, each the same Indian chief, but in two different postures. In making mention of it, the Cincinnati Times says, "We look up and see directly over the falling rock a mass of white limestone resembling the front of an Indian chief, with crown shaven to the scalp lock and fanciful earrings dangling from the ears. As this had no name, we named it the Wyandotte Chief. There he hangs, seemingly suspended, like Mohammed's coffin, keeping his dark and weary vigils waiting to gloat over the death of some daring paleface." I'm going to scan through this again. Here's an artist's picture of Monument Mountain underground in the Wyandotte Cave, which is supposedly the largest underground mountain in the world. Here's a map of the caverns and rooms of Wyandotte Cave.